Maid's daughter arrived late to a date alone. The door opening changed everything. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now let's dive into the story. The clock ticked down as the evening grew later. Inside a posh, upscale restaurant, the atmosphere was elegant, filled with clinking glasses and the soft murmur of well-dressed diners. The chandeliers gleamed above, casting a soft, golden glow over the polished marble floors. At one of the tables near the back, a group of well-dressed individuals awaited their evening, enjoying their meals and engaging in conversation. But there was one person missing from the group, the young girl who had arrived late to a date that had been set weeks ago. The maid's daughter had no way of knowing how the night would unfold. She had been nervous ever since she had gotten the invitation, thinking she wasn't enough for the occasion. Her worn-out shoes tapped lightly on the cobbled street as she hurried toward the restaurant, feeling as though she didn't belong in such an extravagant place. Dressed in the only outfit she had that felt remotely appropriate, a simple, faded blue dress, she felt like she was walking into a world that wasn't meant for people like her. Her heart raced as she approached the grand entrance. The bouncer gave her a cursory glance, but she was let inside. It wasn't as if they had asked for her name. She wasn't someone they would remember. As she stepped into the dining area, she couldn't help but feel out of place. The laughter and clinking of glasses made her feel like an outsider in a world she could never hope to be a part of. She was already late, which only made things worse. The host smiled politely but didn't try to hide the judgment in his eyes as he led her to her seat. There, waiting for her, was the man she was supposed to meet. He was tall, well-groomed, wearing an expensive suit that had been tailored to perfection. A man of wealth and power, a world apart from the girl sitting across from him. As she took her seat, the man gave her a small, knowing smile. He didn't say anything at first, but his eyes said it all. "You're late," they seemed to say, "and you don't belong here." The silence between them stretched for what felt like an eternity. She could feel his gaze on her, and it made her self-conscious. She tried to ignore the feeling of being judged, but it lingered. He, however, said nothing about her tardiness. Instead, he began talking about his latest business ventures, his expensive travels, and the glamorous life he led. It felt like a distant world to her. Every word made her feel more and more like a child who had wandered into a room full of adults. As the night wore on, she could feel the eyes of the other guests on her, like they were all silently judging her for simply existing in their space. And then, in a moment of quiet despair, she made a decision. She would do what she had always done when she was made to feel small. She would stay silent. But deep down, something was rising inside her. She had lived a life where silence was often the only way to survive. But tonight was different. Tonight, she wouldn't let herself be invisible. As the night unfolded, the tension in the air grew thicker. The girl, seated across from the wealthy man, could feel the eyes of everyone in the room on her. It was as if she was being watched under a magnifying glass. Her hands trembled slightly, and she fought the urge to shrink into herself, to become invisible. She tried to focus on the conversation, but his words felt distant, disconnected from her reality. He was talking about his latest trip to Paris, the expensive restaurants he frequented, and the luxurious lifestyle he led. To him, it was all so normal. To her, it was a world so far out of reach. She wasn't used to this, being surrounded by such wealth, such power. Her life had always been a struggle, never something to boast about. She had grown up watching her mother clean houses for wealthy families, scrubbing floors and polishing silver, always with a smile, always with a silent strength that hid the exhaustion behind her eyes. But that strength had passed down to her daughter, though the girl didn't realize it yet. As the conversation continued, she became aware of the judgment in his eyes. His gaze lingered on her for a moment too long, like he was sizing her up, deciding if she was worthy of his time. The silence between them was deafening. She felt the sting of his disapproval, but she wasn't going to let it break her. The more he talked, the more she realized she wasn't going to let herself be belittled by this man. She had grown up being dismissed by people like him, people who thought they were superior simply because of their wealth. She had been mocked before, laughed at for being poor, for being the maid's daughter, but not tonight. Tonight, she was going to show them all. She straightened her back, took a deep breath, and locked eyes with him. She wasn't going to be a silent spectator any longer. She had a voice, and she was going to use it. As if on cue, the waiter arrived, placing a bottle of wine on the table. The man didn't even glance at the waiter, only giving a half-hearted nod, as if this was all routine to him. But when the waiter reached to pour the wine into her glass, she stopped him with a raised hand. "I'm not thirsty," she said, her voice calm but firm. The man turned to her, a flicker of surprise crossing his face. He had expected her to be meek, to nod and smile, to go along with whatever he said. But that wasn't who she was. She wasn't going to be the quiet, invisible girl anymore. She was done with pretending. "What's wrong?" he asked, his tone dripping with condescension. "Don't you like wine?" She met his gaze without hesitation. "It's not that. I just don't need to drink to be worth your time," she said, her voice steady. For the first time, she saw a shift in his expression. He blinked, surprised by her response. The power dynamic that had been so clearly defined in the room just moments before began to crack. He wasn't used to being challenged, especially not by someone like her. But this wasn't just about wine or a date. It was about standing up for herself, about showing him, and everyone in the room, that she was worthy of respect. The air seemed to grow heavier as they stared at each other, neither of them backing down. It was a battle of wills, and for the first time, she felt she might just be winning. The room was heavy with tension as the girl and the man sat across from each other. The silence stretched on, thick and almost suffocating. The people around them seemed to fade into the background, their conversations a blur, as if the entire restaurant was holding its breath, waiting to see what would happen next. For the first time, the man seemed uncertain. He had been so sure of himself, so accustomed to being the center of attention, but now there was something in her eyes that made him hesitate. The girl, for the first time that night, felt a sense of power coursing through her. She wasn't the weak, invisible girl she had been earlier. She wasn't the maid's daughter who had been made to feel small for so long. Tonight, she was someone who could stand her ground, who could show this man, and everyone else in the room, that she was more than they thought. "You think you can just walk in here and look down on me?" she asked, her voice still calm, but now laced with confidence. The words caught him off guard. He had expected her to be meek, to be grateful for the invitation, to accept the humiliation in silence. But she wasn't. She wasn't going to let him get away with treating her like she was invisible. He opened his mouth to respond, but she cut him off. "I know who I am," she said, her gaze unwavering. "I know my worth, and I don't need you, or anyone else, to validate it." The room seemed to hold its breath as the man stared at her, his jaw tightening. For the first time, he was on the defensive. She had called him out, not just for his arrogance, but for the way he treated people like her. People who were invisible to him, who didn't matter because they didn't fit into his world of wealth and status. His eyes flickered with a mixture of surprise and something else, perhaps a hint of respect. The girl didn't back down. She had lived her whole life being judged, being made to feel less than. But not tonight. Tonight, she was going to stand tall. She could feel the weight of his gaze on her, but it didn't make her falter. Instead, she sat up straighter, her chin held high. She was no longer the scared, awkward girl she had been when she first arrived. She was stronger, braver. She wasn't going to let him, or anyone, define her. As the man opened his mouth again, the girl felt a shift in the atmosphere. It wasn't just about her anymore. It was about the entire room. The people who had been watching, the ones who had been judging her without even knowing her, were now looking at her with a different kind of respect. She wasn't just the maid's daughter anymore. She wasn't just the girl who didn't belong. She was someone who commanded attention, someone who had just proven that her worth wasn't defined by her background, her clothes, or her social status. The man, still sitting across from her, seemed to understand that now. He took a deep breath, his earlier arrogance replaced with something more genuine. He looked at her with a new understanding, as if he had just realized that she was more than he had assumed. But it wasn't just him. It was everyone around them. The atmosphere had changed. The power had shifted. And in that moment, she knew she had won. The tension in the room was palpable, but it was no longer the oppressive weight it had once been. The girl, sitting tall with her back straight, no longer felt the need to shrink. The man across from her, his face unreadable for a moment, finally broke the silence. "You've got guts," he said, his voice tinged with admiration. "I never expected this from you." His words were simple, but they carried a shift in perspective. For the first time, she could see a flicker of respect in his eyes, something she had never expected from someone like him. It wasn't just the words he spoke, it was the tone, the way his posture softened. He wasn't looking down at her anymore. She could feel the balance of power in the room changing. The others, still seated at their tables, were now watching them with curiosity, their eyes no longer filled with judgment, but with intrigue. They had all expected the usual, a quiet, submissive girl who would fall in line. But they had witnessed something entirely different. She had shown them that she was more than just a maid's daughter. She was someone who could stand her ground, someone who could challenge even the most powerful people in the room. The man looked at her, his earlier arrogance replaced by something else, an understanding, perhaps, or at least a recognition of her strength. He leaned back in his chair, studying her as if she were a puzzle he had just begun to understand. "I thought you were just another poor kid trying to fit in," he admitted, his voice low, almost as if he was speaking to himself. "But you're not, are you?" She didn't answer right away. There was no need to. He had already realized what she had been trying to show him. The world had always made assumptions about people like her. They saw her clothes, her background, and they thought they knew her. But they didn't. They couldn't. The girl's eyes met his, and she knew that in that moment, something had shifted. It wasn't just about him seeing her differently. It was about her seeing herself differently too. For the first time, she wasn't ashamed of who she was. The power she had felt earlier, the strength she had tapped into, was real. It wasn't just a momentary burst of courage. It was part of who she was. And she wasn't going to let anyone take that away from her. "You're right," she finally said, her voice steady. "I'm not just another poor kid. I'm a person with my own worth. And I don't need anyone to tell me what that is." The man nodded slowly, as if absorbing her words. There was no more condescension in his expression. Instead, there was a kind of quiet acknowledgement. He had underestimated her, and now he saw the truth. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The room had grown quiet, the chatter from the other tables replaced by an almost palpable sense of anticipation. What would happen next? What would they say now? The girl looked around, meeting the eyes of those who had been watching, those who had silently judged her. And in their gaze, she didn't see pity or mockery. She saw respect. The weight of their eyes, once heavy with judgment, now felt lighter. They were seeing her for who she truly was, not just the maid's daughter, but a young woman, who had proven she was more than they had ever imagined. And for the first time in her life, she knew she had earned that respect. The man, still silent, finally stood up. He extended his hand to her, an offer of reconciliation, an acknowledgement of what had just transpired between them. "You've earned my respect," he said, his voice firm but not unkind. She hesitated for only a moment before standing up and shaking his hand. The moment was brief, but in that simple gesture, everything had changed. She had not only earned his respect, but she had also reclaimed her own sense of self-worth. The girl walked away from the table with her head held high. She had done it. She had proven that no matter where you came from, you could stand your ground. You could be more than what others saw. And in the end, that was all that really mattered. As the evening continued, a subtle shift in the air was undeniable. The girl, having stood her ground and proved her worth, felt a sense of calm settle over her. The room was no longer filled with the tension and judgment she had walked into earlier. Instead, there was an underlying sense of respect, something she had never thought she could earn, especially not in such a place. She glanced around, noticing the change in the faces of the people who had once looked at her with disdain. Now, their expressions were softer, less critical. They had seen her for who she truly was. She could feel it in their eyes. She was no longer the outsider. She was part of the room, part of the conversation, and most importantly, she was no longer invisible. The man, still standing by the table, seemed to be deep in thought. His earlier arrogance had been replaced by a quiet humility. He had underestimated her, and now, as he looked at her with renewed appreciation, she knew he would never forget this moment. "You've surprised me," he finally said, his voice gentler than before. "I wasn't expecting this, but I'm glad you showed me something I didn't see before." She nodded, acknowledging his words. But this wasn't about him. It wasn't about proving something to anyone else. It was about proving something to herself. She had always believed she was less than the people around her. She had always thought that her worth was defined by her circumstances, by where she came from, by what she wore. But tonight, she had shattered those beliefs. She had shown herself that she was more than the labels people had placed on her. She was strong, capable, and worthy of respect. As the night wore on, the man continued to talk to her, but now it was different. It wasn't a conversation filled with condescension or dismissal. It was a genuine exchange of ideas. He asked her questions, listened to her answers, and seemed genuinely interested in what she had to say. It was as if, in that brief moment of confrontation, he had begun to see her not just as a maid's daughter, but as someone with something valuable to contribute. For the first time in her life, she felt like she was being heard. The night didn't go exactly as she had imagined when she first arrived. But it didn't matter. The evening wasn't about the date, the fancy restaurant, or the expectations of others. It was about the realization that she could stand up for herself, that she could command respect, and that she didn't have to apologize for who she was. As they wrapped up the evening, the man offered to drive her home. The girl hesitated for a moment. She wasn't used to these kinds of gestures, especially not from someone like him. But then she remembered what had just happened, how she had proven herself, and how she didn't need anyone's permission to feel worthy. "No," she said, shaking her head. "I'll take the bus. I don't need your charity." The man, surprised by her response, nodded slowly. He didn't argue. He simply smiled, respecting her decision. As she left the restaurant, walking out into the cool night air, she felt a sense of freedom she hadn't known before. She was no longer weighed down by the need for validation. She knew her worth, and that was all that mattered. The bus ride home was quiet, but inside, her mind was buzzing with a sense of accomplishment. For the first time, she felt truly empowered. She wasn't the maid's daughter anymore. She wasn't the girl who had to prove herself. She was someone who had already done it, and that made all the difference. The next few days felt like a whirlwind. The girl couldn't quite believe what had happened at the restaurant. It had been a turning point for her, one that she didn't see coming. She had always believed that people like her, the ones who weren't rich, who didn't have fancy clothes or expensive possessions, had to stay in the background, quietly going unnoticed. But now, something had changed. She wasn't going to be silent anymore. The girl spent her days still working, of course, she had to. Her mother's job cleaning houses was the only thing keeping them afloat. But when she walked down the street, when she looked in the mirror, she no longer saw a maid's daughter. She saw someone capable of more. The respect she had earned that night at the restaurant wasn't just from the man she had met. It came from herself too. She realized that she had always allowed her circumstances to define her, to hold her back. But now she knew better. The world didn't define her, she defined herself. At the same time, her mother noticed the change. One evening, as they sat at the kitchen table, her mother gave her a long look, something unreadable in her eyes. The girl knew what was coming. Her mother had always been the strong, silent type. She didn't speak much about feelings or the difficulties of life. But this time, it was different. "I'm proud of you," her mother said softly, her voice thick with emotion. "I've seen the way you've been carrying yourself lately. You've changed." The girl's heart swelled at her mother's words. It wasn't the praise she had expected, but it was exactly what she needed. She had always wanted to make her mother proud, but it had always felt like she was fighting against an impossible tide. Now, she knew that she wasn't just fighting for her mother's approval. She was fighting for her own. She had proven something to herself, something she never thought she could. "I'm not going to hide anymore, Mom," she said, her voice steady. "I'm going to make something of myself. I know I can." Her mother looked at her, a small smile tugging at the corners of her lips. She didn't say anything else, but in that quiet moment, they both understood. The girl had stepped into her own power, and nothing would be the same again. The next week, she received an unexpected call. It was from the man she had met at the restaurant. He had been thinking about their conversation ever since that night, and he wanted to offer her something. He didn't know exactly what it was, but he knew she had potential. "I've got a position in my company that I think you'd be perfect for," he said. "It's not much, but it's a start. And you've earned it." The girl was stunned. She never thought she would be in a position to be offered something like this. But here it was. She didn't hesitate. She accepted. That moment, that small step, was the beginning of something bigger than she had ever imagined. It wasn't just about a job or a handout. It was about her finding a place in a world that had always seemed out of reach. She was no longer the invisible girl. She was someone who had earned her place, and she would keep earning it every step of the way. The first few weeks at the new job were a whirlwind of learning and adjustment. The girl was determined not to let the opportunity slip through her fingers. The office was a world apart from anything she had ever known. The sleek desks, the glass walls, the hum of busy professionals working at their computers, it all felt like something out of a dream. But unlike the restaurants and high-society events she had attended, this was a place where her voice mattered. She wasn't just an outsider in the office. She was there to contribute, to prove she belonged. And prove it she did. The man who had offered her the job, the one from the restaurant, kept his word. He wasn't just giving her a chance. He was giving her responsibility. Day after day, she worked alongside professionals who had years of experience. At first, she felt out of her depth, but her determination and her ability to adapt quickly shone through. She wasn't going to let anyone look at her and see the maid's daughter. She wanted them to see someone with talent, someone who could rise to the occasion. And soon enough, her hard work began to pay off. Her colleagues started to notice her, not just as the new hire, but as someone who could hold her own in meetings, someone who could offer fresh ideas, and someone who could be relied upon. The respect she had earned at the restaurant wasn't a one-time thing. It was something she carried with her into her new job, and it followed her every day. But it wasn't just about the work. It was about the feeling of finally having a place in the world, a place where she wasn't judged for her background, but for her abilities. One afternoon, after a particularly challenging project, her boss called her into his office. She walked in, her heart racing, unsure of what to expect. He looked up from his desk, smiling. "You've done great work," he said. "In fact, I'm recommending you for a promotion." The girl froze. A promotion? She had never imagined that someone like her, someone who had come from nothing, would be given an opportunity like this. It wasn't just about the title or the salary increase. It was about the acknowledgement that she was more than just a maid's daughter. She was someone who could stand on her own, who had earned her place in a world that had once seemed impossible to reach. "You've earned it," he added. "You've shown more drive and determination than most people I've worked with. I think you're ready for more." The girl didn't know what to say. She had come a long way since that night at the restaurant, and now, here she was, standing at the threshold of something new, something bigger. It was a dream come true, but more than that, it was proof that she had the power to change her own story. As she left the office that evening, her mind raced. She thought about her mother, who had worked so hard to give her a chance at something more. She thought about the struggles she had faced, the judgment, the silence, and how she had fought to be seen for who she truly was. She had done it. She had changed the narrative of her life, and no one could take that away from her. The girl walked out of the office, her head held high, knowing that this was just the beginning of a new chapter in her life. She had come from nothing, but now, she was someone who had proven that her worth wasn't defined by her past, but by her strength, her drive, and her ability to rise above it all. The promotion was only the beginning of a new chapter in her life, but with each step forward, the girl felt the weight of the change. She had worked hard for it, and now the fruits of her labor were starting to show. Her new role came with new responsibilities, and while it was exciting, it was also intimidating. The challenges were different now. She wasn't just trying to prove herself anymore. She was now in a position where others were looking to her for guidance, for answers, and she had to be ready. There were days when the pressure felt overwhelming. The expectations from her boss and colleagues were higher now, and the girl couldn't help but feel the weight of it all. But she had already proven to herself that she was capable of more than what people had assumed. She had stepped into this role with confidence, knowing that she could rise to the occasion. The girl threw herself into her work, taking on projects that pushed her to think critically, to lead, and to take initiative. Her colleagues, once distant and unsure of her, now came to her for advice, asking for her input. The respect she had earned at the restaurant, the respect she had fought for, had translated into her new job. She was no longer the quiet girl in the corner. She was someone people turned to when they needed answers. Her growth wasn't just about her job. It was about how she was transforming from the inside. She no longer felt like she had to hide her true self. She wasn't just the maid's daughter anymore. She was a professional, a peer, someone who had earned her place. But even as her career flourished, there were still moments of doubt. There were still days when she felt like an outsider, like she didn't belong. But those moments were fleeting. She had learned to trust herself. She had learned that no one else could define her worth. Only she could do that. One afternoon, after a particularly tough day at work, she sat down at her desk, feeling the weight of exhaustion in her bones. But as she looked out the window, something inside her clicked. She realized that she had come so far. She had started at the bottom, uncertain of her place in the world, and now she was standing tall. The girl smiled to herself, a sense of pride swelling in her chest. She was no longer just surviving. She was thriving. It wasn't just about her success at work. It was about how far she had come as a person, how much she had learned, how much she had grown. She had taken control of her life, and no one could take that away from her. That evening, when she got home, her mother was sitting at the kitchen table, her hands wrapped around a mug of tea. The girl sat down beside her, a tired but content smile on her face. "I did it, Mom," she said softly. "I'm really doing it." Her mother didn't say anything at first. She just reached out and squeezed her daughter's hand. They didn't need words. In that moment, they both knew that the girl had found her place in the world, and she wasn't going anywhere. She had earned it, and she had earned the right to be proud of herself. She wasn't just the maid's daughter. She was someone who had worked hard, who had fought for what she wanted, and who had achieved it. And that was something no one could take away from her. As the months went by, the girl continued to rise, gaining recognition not only for her work but for the person she had become. She was no longer the timid, invisible girl who had once walked into a lavish restaurant feeling out of place. She was someone who had shaped her own destiny, who had overcome the odds and proven that her background didn't define her. She had become a force to be reckoned with, someone who had earned her success through hard work, resilience, and an unwavering belief in herself. Her colleagues saw it, her boss saw it, and most importantly, she saw it. She had transformed into someone she was proud to be. The girl's mother, who had always worked hard to support her, now watched her daughter with a new sense of admiration. She had always known her daughter was capable of great things, but now, seeing her take charge of her life with such confidence, it filled her heart with pride. They were no longer just surviving. They were thriving. One evening, after another successful day at work, the girl sat down with her mother in their small but cozy living room. The evening light filtered through the window, casting a warm glow on the simple but comforting space they had built together. Her mother looked at her, her eyes soft but filled with quiet pride. "You've come so far," her mother said, her voice thick with emotion. The girl smiled, her heart full of gratitude for the woman who had always been her rock. "I couldn't have done it without you, Mom. You taught me to never give up, no matter what." They shared a quiet moment, the bond between them stronger than ever. The girl had made it. She had achieved what she once thought was impossible, and she had done it on her own terms. Her journey was far from over. She still had so much to learn, so much more to achieve. But now, she knew that no dream was too big, no challenge was too great. She had the strength to face whatever came her way, and she would continue to rise. As she looked back at the path she had taken, from the humble beginnings of being the maid's daughter to standing confidently in a world she had once thought was out of her reach, she realized that the most important lesson she had learned was not about success or recognition. It was about believing in herself, trusting her instincts, and knowing that she was worthy of everything she had worked for. She was no longer just the girl from the wrong side of the tracks. She was someone who had carved her own place in the world, someone who had proven that with determination and self-belief, anything was possible. And as she sat with her mother, knowing they had both overcome so much, she knew the journey they had started together was only the beginning of something even greater. The girl had found her strength, and in doing so, had unlocked the potential to create a life that was all her own. Millionaire stories often show how determination and hard work can turn someone's life around, and this story is no exception. From humble beginnings as a maid's daughter, the protagonist finds herself in a position where she has to prove her worth. This journey unfolds within a world where the rich and powerful often overlook those without wealth. But through resilience, the girl rises to the occasion, earning respect and opportunities she never thought possible. The transformation is powerful as she challenges the expectations placed on her, overcoming the judgment and assumptions of others. Through her hard work, She secures a job in a prestigious company, gaining recognition and respect, showing that millionaire stories are not just about wealth, but about inner strength and belief. The girl's success is a testament to how anyone, regardless of their background, can overcome obstacles and achieve greatness. In this story, the girl learns that the true power lies in self-belief and not letting circumstances define her. Her journey shows that millionaire stories aren't just about money. They are about the relentless pursuit of a better life and the ability to stand up for yourself. As the girl moves forward, she proves that anyone, no matter where they come from, can change their own destiny and achieve what they once thought was impossible. Through hard work and perseverance, she becomes a living example of the transformative power that is often seen in millionaire stories, proving that success comes from within.